number 33, this being the 39th Amendment of the Constitution, Right2Housing Bill 2020, and I call on Deputy Boyd Barrett to move that the bill be now read a second time.
Yes, I move.
Is that agreed? Is agreed? Yes.
Yeah.
Over to you, Deputy.
Okay, so I'm moving the People for Profit Bill, the 39th Amendment to the Constitution, Right2Housing Bill 2020. And we did, it's worth noting, move this bill in the last Dáil in September 2017. And at that point, not surprisingly, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael voted against us, and as a result of that, it didn't pass. So, in the context of the earlier debate, let's be absolutely clear. We want to put the right to secure, affordable, dignified and appropriate housing into the Constitution and make it a right for every person living in this country. And Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael voted against it. And people just need to hear that fact. This particular bill seeks to delimit the protections that are given to private property in favour of the common good, which does allow, even under our Constitution, the common good for the government to override private property rights, but it doesn't define clearly what the common good is, and specifically, it doesn't include in that the right to housing as a clear part of that common good and give it priority. So that is what we are setting out to do. I won't read all the wording, but just to say the state in particular recognises, this is our bill, the common good is including the right to secure, affordable, dignified housing appropriate to need for all residents of Ireland, and shall guarantee this right through its laws, policies and the prioritisation of resources. And it goes on to say it will delimit the right to private property in that regard. Now, why is this necessary? And indeed, why did the government, or the two major parties of the government, oppose this last time? The Greens supported it, so it'll be interesting to see, are they consistent with their previous position in terms of trying to get this bill passed into law, to get a referendum so that we can insert this right. Why is it important to do this? Well, look, I'm not going to rehearse the obvious about the absolutely shocking, obscene, outrageous housing and homelessness crisis that we have in this country. You only have to walk through the city centre to see the tents littering the streets of people who are homeless. You only have to think of the 100,000 families that are on housing waiting lists in my area, up to 20 years, waiting for a social housing that they'll never get. You only have to deal with the fact that 70 to 80% of working people in this country haven't got a prayer of being able to buy a house when property prices have gone up by nearly 100% over the last 7 years, when rents are now running, certainly in my part of Dublin, at about an average of €2,000 a month, 2,500 being common, 3,000 being not uncommon. How is anybody supposed to pay for this? And it is a disaster. And the government have facilitated all along the line the vulture funds, the corporate landlords who are profiting from this crisis, and all of their policies have sought to facilitate them and prioritise their rights over the right of people to have secure and affordable housing. And today we had residents from a place called St Helens Court that I have brought up, I'd say about 30 times in this Dáil over the last 4 years, and they are still in the desperate plight that they've been in all that time at the hands of a vulture funds that were invited into this country by the Fine Gael Labour government in 2012, 2013, who profited handsomely from the housing misery that people are facing. And there they were out there protesting today because they are now overholding, because they've been evicted by a vulture fund. They've lived there for years. They're part of the community. Some of them are elderly, some of them are unwell, and the council is telling them, sorry, we've nowhere for you to go. You're probably going to have to go to a homeless hostel. They're looking for affordable tenancies. They can't find them. Their rent, even the rent they were paying before they'd been evicted by this vulture fund, were €900 €500 a month, but you see the problem is that same landlord on that property can now get €2,000 a month, and that's why they want them out. And that's why they've tried on 5 occasions to get them out over the last 2 years, and now they've succeeded because the law that protects tenants is not robust enough to deal with the ruthless profit hunger of these vulture funds, and the government does nothing because we can't interfere with private property rights, i.e. the right of corporate landlords and vulture funds to make profit by making other people homeless. So that's why we need to change the law, and we need to put the right in the Constitution to protect tenants, to stop unfair evictions, to take action against vulture funds and land hoarders and property speculators who profiteer from the housing misery of other people. And consistently, the government has failed to do that. In my view, in our view, because in the end you're dancing to the tune of these landlords. Because the Irish rich have always got rich through property, through landlordism, through their investments in these kind of investment vehicles that they now want to move into the public land bank. People getting very, very rich from property, and specifically from the housing misery and homelessness that huge numbers of people, not just those who are in the dire situation of being homeless, but those trying to get on the property, trying to buy a home, trying to rent something that they can afford, and the constant insecurity if you're a renter or tenant that you could be put out in the street. So this bill will remove the obstacles and excuses to taking the effective action we need in order to have rent controls, in order to give security to people, in order that the state will prioritise the resources it has to make housing a basic right for everybody in this country.
Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, Kieran Corley. The government, for years, has hidden behind the Constitution. It's hidden its class interest, the class interest of those it represents, behind the Constitution, or has attempted to do so. It's avoided taking action that would resolve the housing crisis, but hurt the profits of those who benefit from the housing crisis, because it represents those who benefit. The developers, the speculators, the cuckoo funds, the corporate landlords, etc. But instead of coming out and saying, well, actually, this is the class that we represent and we're not going to implement measures that will hurt them, instead the government has repeatedly said, no, we'd like to do what needs to be done, but we can't because of the Constitution. Rent controls, Constitution says no. Eviction ban, Constitution says no. Rent freeze, Constitution says no. I don't believe it. It's some coincidence that the limits of the Constitution always seem to be just as far as the government is willing to go and no further. Very coincidental and very convenient for the government. And when under pressure, under massive pressure with COVID, then the government finds a way, and all of a sudden it is constitutional because of COVID to have an eviction ban and to have a rent freeze. But now that COVID is hopefully coming towards an end, we're back to normality, and all of these things are simply unconstitutional again. Like I said, I don't believe it. I think it is class interest that is at play here. Yes, that class interest is reflected in the kind of constitution that we have, but the government hides behind it. There is no hiding anymore. If you actually are in favour of taking measures to ensure that renters are able to rent at an affordable rate, if you're actually interested in tackling homelessness, well then you would not only allow this bill to pass second stage, you would allow a referendum to happen and allow people to vote overwhelmingly to enshrine the right to housing in the Constitution, and to mean there can be no such perceived or imagined or invented obstacle to doing what is necessary in the future. We understand that the government is saying they will allow it to pass second stage. Great. But we don't consider that a victory yet, and we would say that to people outside who are watching. We think it's a manoeuvre by the government to avoid openly opposing it, in order instead to bring it into committee and then drag it out, and then presumably, and we might get a hint of this for the Minister's speech today, presumably replace it with a watered-down wording that won't actually make a difference for people. And I'd send a warning to the government: don't try to kill this bill and this referendum in that way. Don't try to water this down, because if you do, you will be facing with very significant movements of protest. You can see it already emerging, housing as the key political issue, and people are going to mobilise in their thousands and tens of thousands on this issue in the autumn time. The government is under massive pressure in relation to housing. That's clear. It's reflected in the fact that they're going to allow it to pass second stage now when they didn't in 2017. It was reflected in the fact that under pressure, the issue that you didn't even know existed about the 8% rent increases for many renters, you didn't know existed because you're out of touch with renters, but this week under pressure you move to say, well, we're going to deal with it. Well, we need to see the details of how you're going to deal with it, to ensure that there will be no such rent increases of more than 4%. And again, we'll be campaigning for rent controls to bring them down. But even in terms of dealing with this situation, that nobody is left out of those protections. We need to see the details. The final point I just want to finish on is a point about the far right in this country. The far right have been trying to capitalise on the fears of people around COVID. And they're going to try to build on that in the aftermath of COVID, and they'll try to take up the issue of housing. And they'll try to point the blame for the issue of housing, particularly at immigrants, and say they're the people to blame rather than the capitalist free market system within housing. But I would point to people that elements of the far right have shown their true colours. They're campaigning against this bill because they say wrongly that the bill will mean the government can be able to take ordinary people's homes. Obviously it does no such thing. But it does reveal their true colours, that ultimately they're not on the side of working class people that they claim to represent, because they're also not willing to challenge the free market system. They defend that system and they defend those who benefit from it. I think Deputy Smith is now speaking.
Deputy Breed-Smith. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's critics in this House who'll argue that this bill won't build a single house, and we think we all know who they are. And it really is a tiresome response from those who have presided over this state for the last 10 years, as the housing crisis has become the catastrophe it is today, and a generation have been scarred from the failure of the state to provide a basic necessity to its people. Normal, ordinary people have a desire for a secure and permanent shelter, and the only way they think they can do it in this country is to own their own home, because there is no long-term rental security, even after all the days and fights of the Land League in the 1800s. It is not deep in the psyche of ordinary people to own their own property. It's deep in the psyche of the wealthy elite in this country to profit from property. The nexus of estate agents, financiers, consultants, stockbrokers, builders, developers, and the legal apparatchiks around them all make sure that housing policy is made for them, our laws and legislation are made for them, from planning and development acts to tax laws and law and order acts themselves. There is always a housing crisis for the poorest in society, but it is not a crisis that is a mistake. It is a crisis that indicates how the system works and is meant to work on behalf of the cohort of the wealthy. We commodify housing on behalf of the elite. We create a scarcity of public housing on their behalf, and we watch for decades as homeless numbers rise and rents rocket. And now we watch as vultures and cuckoos snatch available homes with the promise that the state will pay exorbitant lease and rents from them for 25 years and then hand back the homes in good nick to them 25 years later. We have scrapped rules and regulations on sizes, on aspects of property, on the height of property, on the standards that we expect them to be built to, and we treat builders and developers as if they had some need for profit that was a natural occurrence of God and needed to be accommodated. We do this even as the crisis worsens before our eyes and have a whole range of justifications and reasons, but mostly it's because it suits that cohort that I speak about. This state and its past government have a deep resistance to rights of citizens, be that the rights of legislating for children with disabilities, with autism, the educational rights of people, or even something as basic as housing. We've for years and years talked referentially about our constitutional respect for private property rights. Well, we have never accepted that constitutional priority for private rights over the common good, and it doesn't explain all the failures of the state. But others seem to think that defending lack of action will allow the state off the hook, taking them on the basis that we can't do anything because of private property right. Well, let's change that priority now, and let's push the balance in the other direction and give people the right to housing, decent accommodation, and don't allow the excuse that the Constitution stands in their way, because it'll be used in the future again and again to stop us really improving housing policy in this country. We have to start now to defend people's basic right and their basic human need over the right of someone else to profit from their misery. And we also have to start looking at what we are doing to our cities and towns in the terrible planning decisions that are being made without any democratic oversight on them by locally elected councillors. That has to end, and if it doesn't end, we are going to see, as has been said by other deputies, a mass angry movement on the streets, something like you've never seen before.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. Minister, please.
Thank you, Count Cora, and I thank the deputies for raising these issues and bringing forward the bill, and can confirm that the government has not agreed to oppose the bill. As they are aware, the programme for government sets out a commitment to hold a referendum on housing. We have supported the debate this evening, and we are keen to hear the views, as we have been, on this important issue. And I thank those who are contributing to the debate, and I listen to the further contributions with interest. It is important that the government does not rush to the electorate on this commitment. We need to make sure that we give the potential aspects of the referendum on housing and what type of provision can be accommodated within the Constitution detailed consideration. I am keen to listen to all the views expressed in the House this evening and in the further debate we are having in the Seanad, which is proposed for tomorrow evening. This highlights the range of issues that need to be considered and the depth of views and feelings across all parties. Our Constitution quite rightly affects all citizens. When proposing an amendment to the Constitution, we need to be absolutely clear on the full implications that could arise out of any amendment. We can all agree on that principle. We cannot amend the Constitution without full clarity and knowledge as to what the change means. This can impact on other rights in the Constitution, which will need to be balanced with any proposed amendment. A lack of clarity on all potential implications of an amendment can result in legal complications for years to come and deflect important resources away from the primary focus, which is the provision of homes for our citizens and the prevention of homelessness. I am sure that none of us would wish to see that. That is why the government has committed to historic levels of funding for housing and homelessness preventions and is committed to ensuring that affordable, quality housing solutions are available to everyone in society. The programme for government commits to an ambitious range of housing actions, including to put affordability at the heart of the housing system, to tackle homelessness, increase the social housing stock by more than 50,000 over the next 5 years, and work with the construction sector to ensure the number of new builds grow right across our economy for all our citizens. The Affordable Housing Bill 2020, which is now progressing through the Houses, will ensure that affordability is put at the heart of our housing system and will underpin the new local authority-led scheme of affordable homes purchase, an affordable purchase shared equity scheme, and the introduction of a new national cost rental scheme. It also includes amendments to Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act to provide for an increase in the Part 5 requirement to a set 20% in every local authority area. This will have a minimum 10% requirement for social homes and up to a further 10% requirement for affordable homes where required, or where not so required, the additional percentage may be used towards social housing. Securing a safe and affordable home for all needs real actions on the ground, and amending the Constitution on its own will not deliver what is needed. It is also appropriate that the government takes time to consider the other economic, social and cultural rights that are recommended to be incorporated by the Convention on the Constitution and which were outlined in more detail in their 8th report. Each right must be balanced against each other, as well as with the existing provisions of the Constitution must take into account of interdependencies. It is also important to acknowledge the commitment is to hold a referendum on housing and not just a right to housing. It is not restricted to only considering a right to housing at this stage. We do not want to restrict the potential thinking on all options. I would highlight to the House that the next text on the set of the Private Members Bill, which is before us here, proposes to delimit the existing right to private property. This raises many complex issues. In the interests of all our citizens, substantial research and legal advice will be needed on the interaction of such an amendment with other constitutional provisions, such as Article 43 on private property rights. It would make a mistake to think that the right to private property only relates to the very wealthy in our country. The private ownership of your own home is a matter of greater concern to all, and we must not ignore this. There is another commitment in the programme for government which will be critical in supporting the holding of a referendum on housing in a balanced way. We are establishing a commission on housing, and it is intended that this commission will examine a referendum on housing. Work on establishing this important commission is advancing quickly, and Minister O'Brien has announced the appointment of the chair-designate for the commission last week. This will be Mr. John O'Connor, the retiring CEO of the Housing Agency, who will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this very important post. The terms of reference will now be drafted in consultation with him and having regard to the commitments in the programme for government and the forthcoming Housing for All plan, which we intend to establish in the Commission by September. The duration of the Commission will be set out once the terms of reference have been completed and a reporting requirement have been established. Our approach will bring together experts from various sectors and will allow for the involvement of stakeholders for a collaborative approach. This is an important step to support the holding of a housing referendum in a considered and democratic way. The text in the Private Members Bill that has been debated this evening can be evaluated further by the Commission as part of this process, as well as the text proposed by other stakeholders who have expressed an interest in this referendum. Minister O'Brien has had the pleasure of meeting with some stakeholders in this area already, including Mercy Law Centre and Home for Good Coalition, which have been keen to ensure that all voices can be heard in a balanced way. The Commission will be asked to consider and evaluate all proposals and undertake research of relevance. Once the Commission has reported on the most appropriate form of words for a constitutional amendment, we intend to consult with Cabinet colleagues and seek advice from the Attorney-General before putting a form of words to our citizens. COVID-19 has highlighted for all of us the importance of having a secure and safe home, and the Government will continue its progress on a range of measures as set out in the Programme for Government. By supporting the debate in both houses of the Oireachtas, and both Private Members Bill and the motion in the Shannon tomorrow, we can inform the development of policy in relation to holding a referendum on housing. This will also inform the establishment of the Commission on Housing, which will be an important vehicle for the consideration of all these related issues. I want to thank the deputies again for their input into the debate tonight and reiterate that we are delivering on our commitment to have a referendum on housing in a measured and balanced way, and that we will consider the views of all in that process. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Gino Kenny.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, if you want to see what's wrong with the housing policy of this government and successive governments, you only have to look at the recent media reports around vulture funds, cuckoo funds, whatever you call them, and financial institutions buying up tracts of homes. And these financial institutions come here for one purpose only, and that purpose is to make profit at the expense of first-time buyers, renters, and the citizens of this country that want to find a home. And Maynooth Mullen Park was just one instance. Even in Lucan, where my constituency, 400 homes have been bought by a vulture fund. So the impact of that is that it denies people that want to buy a home and settle in the community. And to make things even more worse, these vulture funds pay no tax whatsoever. And that concept was created by the Fine Gael government. So you have this perfect storm in relation to policy, in relation to the homeless crisis that it's ongoing, And people will kind of scratch their head and say, how come a government that's been in power since 2011 and prior to that has got it so wrong about housing? How have they got it so wrong when there is plenty of money to kind of throw at housing, but it's going into the wrong places? You still have a situation where there is still thousands of people still in emergency accommodation. So these financial institutions, which is the posh name for cuckoo funds, they serve one purpose and one purpose only, and that purpose is to serve the shareholders rather than people that want to rent or want to buy. Minister, just to bring you back to February 2020, when there was a general election in this country, and there was an earthquake, a political earthquake, and one of the main reasons why there was a political earthquake was one of the reasons because of housing. Now, some people they had a home and so forth, but the empathy they had for those that couldn't find a home or those that were rented out of the market, there was a huge amount of kind of empathy in that general election for those that find themselves in that situation. And Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil got punished for that, right? Now, I'll just give you some advice, and this is free advice. If you do not get the housing, if you do not get the situation, address the housing situation in your 4 years of tenure, you will politically fry for it. Because the people of this country will never forgive you, and they will punish you at the ballot box if you do not sort the situation that's completely unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable, where people are homeless in this state, one of the richest states in the world, and where there's so many people homeless, and so many people that cannot, even rent a home. Even people that have good wages on good salaries can't even buy a home. So there's something fundamentally wrong with the policy of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and that policy is looking to the free market all the time. There is an answer to this. And the answer is, you build homes, you build them on public land, and you build them for people rather than for profits. Because these vulture funds are here, as I said, for one reason and one reason only. They do not serve any purpose, and the purpose they serve was a policy that your government introduced. And they're not wanted here. Nobody wants them, and they should be gone forever. So, Minister, that free advice, you have 4 years to get it right.
Okay, Deputy Cian O'Callaghan. Where's Deputy Cian O'Callaghan?
Out just for a second.
He stepped out. Well, Deputy Sean Kenny.
Thank you very much, Cahill, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill. The first thing I must say is that we all talk about housing, and we talk about it being a crisis, and we talk about the spirit of this bill is the right to a person to have a home, which we all agree with. The problem with it is, how do we get there? And I know that people keep talking about what's wrong, and we have to find solutions. I know that the government at the moment are putting more money and investing more money into trying to get more houses built. But what I have to say, Minister, is that sometimes we look a gift horse in the mouth, and I've said this repeatedly. We have so many vacant properties in this country. We have so many vacant properties in our towns and our villages. We have 75% of the space over ground floor retail in Dublin City which is empty. And we have to ask the question, why are we looking at this gift horse in the mouth and not doing something about it? What it needs is investment for a quick return in getting house units back into use. At the same time, rejuvenating our towns, our villages, and the city centre of Dublin. I'm from a constituency, Galway East, and we have a housing crisis there. It's not confined to the cities. It's not confined to any particular place. A lot of the phone calls I get into my office are people who are looking to rent a place. They're looking to find out where they can buy a house. They're looking at where they can build a house. And one of the reasons why that's happening is because Galway East is probably typical of a lot of other constituencies where we have a problem, what I call, we have frozen the planning system. And what I mean by that is that we have towns, we have villages where we cannot build houses, where the local authority cannot give planning permission, where a board planola will refuse planning permission for the simple reason we do not have a wastewater treatment plant in place. At the same time, we're talking about how do we increase the houses, how do we do this? And simply, when we had the regional group had a private member's motion down a couple of weeks ago, which was calling on the government to give some of that money for housing directly to Irish Water to get them to implement a plan of infrastructure in these towns and villages. People often talk about affordable housing, and I wonder what do they mean by it? Because it's not so much we have to provide affordable houses, we have to provide houses full stop so that people can live in them. And what's happening at the moment is that our supply of houses is not coming through. I hear people giving out about developers and builders as if builders are the root of all evil. The building contractors in this country are trying to make a living like everybody else. They build houses. They're not speculators. They employ a lot of people, and we have to show them respect. And what I would also say is that if we don't have a building industry, we will not have any houses. So don't couple builders in with the blame game when we talk about what's wrong. I think we have to look at what we can do to put things right. I would also say that when you look at it and you say, right, what else do we need to do? We need to make sure that when young people who are brave enough to go out there, to buy a site, to build a house, that they are given support to do that. Or they want to build a house in their own rural area, beside their own families, for family support into the future, that we actually would support that. Where the son or daughter or niece or nephew of a family farm want to build a house on the family farm, that we should support that. We should not be dithering on that. The other issue in relation to social housing, and I would know a bit about all of this because I worked in the construction for a long time before I came in here. The local authorities can build social housing to a top-class standard when they're given the resources to do that. They have proven it time and time again. Galway County Council have completed, even in the last 2 or 3 years, some fine social housing projects in Galway. But the problem is they need to build more of them. They need more resources. They need more expertise within the local authorities so that they can drive on. And Minister, I'm not so sure about the Land Development Agency because I'm fearful of that, because I believe that when I look at Irish Water, they have concentrated their efforts with limited resources on certain areas. And that's why we have the Corrafens, the Craughwells, the Athenrys, the Abennockmoys, who are now frozen out of the planning system because they cannot build because they don't have the infrastructure. Why? Irish Water have concentrated their resources in places where the biggest pressures are. And when they have limited resource, they have to make decisions. So for instance, right now, Athenry has received an investment of maybe 5 million to upgrade its wastewater treatment plant. The work has been done. The plant is commissioned with over 3 years, and yet it is of little use to the town because the network cannot be done because the funding is not in place to do it. Leaving that town without any housing development at the crossroads of 2 motorways, railways, and within shouting distance of Galway. It's making no sense. Lastly, I would say that when we look at all of this, we have to say to the local authorities, we'll make it easier for you. We will make and this is something, Minister, the Department have got to do, is let go of some of the controls. I know that at the moment, if a local authority wants to build a housing scheme, they have to go through 4 gateways of approvals before they will get any money. And we also have to look at our planning system. We have to look at how we can fast-track housing, and I know that the way we're doing it at the moment is so cumbersome that people are just walking away from it. They do not have the appetite for it. So those people who are brave enough to build their house, those people who are brave enough to get out a mortgage, need to get better support from government. We need to make sure that those people are treated and have the right to their own house and to own their own house. This bill, which is about a constitutional issue, is all well and fine. But I would say to you, Minister, that what we need to do as legislators is to make sure we don't bring in any more strategies, we don't bring in any more think tanks, and we don't bring in any more working groups, but that we do the simple things and do them right. Vacant houses, vacant sites, investment in Irish water in the places where houses can be built. We have situations where we have land zoned for development as R1 development in towns and they cannot be built upon. And that is why our supply is not coming through, and that is why the prices are so high, and that's why rent is so high, because the supply is not there. But we can release some of the pressures if we do some practical things in a very quick way. We do not take years to change it. The money is coming into the system, but let's put it in the right place to get the best result as quickly as possible. Thank you, Kinkin.
Thank you very much, Deputy. I'm just concerned that we have so many members offering that we may not be able to get in everyone, so could we maybe aim for about 5 minutes or a little more per head, if that's possible. Now, Deputy O'Brien, I'm calling next. I'll go back to Deputy O'Callaghan then in just a minute. Deputy O'Brien.
Thank you, Cian Corla, and I'm happy to take 5 minutes to ensure others get to speak. First of all, I'd like to thank People Before Profit, Solidarity and Rise for retabling this legislation today. Sinn Féin was happy to support it in the previous Dáil and will be enthusiastically supporting it here this evening. We have also tabled, both in the last Dáil and introduced at first stage, a similar bill this year as part of our commitment to ensuring the enshrining of a right to housing in the Constitution. And in fact, we're active supporters of the Home for Good coalition, who probably have produced the most superior wording that I have seen to date, and I look forward to the occasion when that legislation is brought forward, preferably by the government, but if not, by the opposition, to ensure that we get the referendum. I listened very carefully to Minister Burke, and he rightly said that changing the Constitution is a significant fact. We have to take our time, we have to do it right, and we have to ensure that there are no negative impacts or unintended consequences on other aspects in the Constitution. My problem with his argument, of course, is the government has been taking a very long time. It was 2014 when 85% of those participating in a constitutional convention supported the proposition of enshrining the right to housing in the Constitution. It was 2016 when the last government's programme for government promised that they would allow the Oireachtas Housing Committee to consider this matter. Only then, by way of a deal between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, did they snatch that away and put it in a very inappropriate place, the Finance Committee, to consider that and then ensure that committee never considered the matter. The fact that we have a very ambiguous commitment in the programme for government for referendum housing shows, in fact, that there is no agreement between the coalition partners. And recently, the Oireachtas Housing Committee had a very significant development. Homes for Good came and presented their wording to us, wording that was produced in consultation with some of the country's leading constitutional experts on the issue of property rights, land and housing. And for the first time, and I welcome this, Fianna Fáil fully expressed their support for that wording and that referendum. Unfortunately, Fine Gael were unable to do that, but it was then that the Housing Committee wrote to the Minister to urge him to meet Home for Good, and I welcome the fact that he has done so, and he also has said he supports the constitutional right to housing. But the point I'm making, Minister, is that 2014 to 2021 is a very, very long time for Fine Gael to be trying to make up its mind on this matter. I do not believe it is going to take the Housing Commission or any considerable length of time for us to decide that we need to move forward. What I would actually recommend the government do is take the Home for Good wording, bring that to the Attorney General, get the view of the Attorney General, and then decide either that wording or some other version of that wording is to be brought forward. It's also very important for people to understand why a right to housing in the Constitution is important. It doesn't guarantee everybody a right to a home the day after such a referendum would hopefully pass. What it does is it places a legal obligation on any government to progressively vindicate that right over time, to ensure that we don't have the situation in the future that we have today, where thousands of adults and children are living in emergency accommodation, in many cases sometimes for 3 or 4 years, where thousands of people are unable to put a secure and affordable roof over their head, whether in the private or indeed in the public sector. And therefore, just like all of the other rights in the Constitution, it ensures that government comply with those obligations. How a government does that is a matter for the democratic process. It's a matter for parties and voters to decide which combination of political parties, which combination of policies are then used in a future government to ensure that right is secured. But the obligation itself is absolutely crucial. It is a tool, one of the many tools that I think we need to ensure that future governments do not repeat the mistakes of this current government and previous governments who have consistently failed to ensure people have that right to secure and affordable accommodation, particularly those most vulnerable in our society. I also just want to conclude by saying that a constitutional right to housing, combined with the kind of investment and policy proposals that the Economic and Social Research Institute outlined today, is where we need to go. We have had 10 years of Fine Gael-led housing policy, including under a government with a Fianna Fáil housing minister, and those policies are patently failing. That is why the ESRI today said government needs to double direct capital investment in delivery of social and affordable homes to produce what they said was 18,000 public homes. I think many of us would prefer to see in the order of 20,000 genuinely affordable homes. So let's pass this bill tonight. Let's move forward to the referendum that many of us want to see. But let's also see government start to put its money where its mouth is. There's no point talking about affordable housing. We need to double capital investment, 20,000 genuinely affordable social cost rental affordable purchase homes a year starting from next year. That's what it's going to take to tackle this crisis. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you, Deputy O'Brien. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
Ceann Comhairle, and firstly just want to agree previous comments from previous deputy in terms of the importance in terms of local authorities, that it is near impossible for local authorities to get approval, and if the government is serious about social housing and building, that very long process that they have to go through that makes it very difficult does need to be tackled. Want to say this, that anyone watching in this evening now in a housing crisis situation, and there's thousands of people in this country in that situation, are going to be very worried that the government are clearly saying they're not going to deal with this urgently at all. They're going to take their time. In the middle of an absolute housing catastrophe, where we've more than 8,000 people living in emergency accommodation, more than 125 people sleeping rough in Dublin on the last count. We have more than 100,000 people on housing waiting lists and in insecure HAP tenancies. And the government is saying they're going to take their time on this. And it's simply not the case to imply that work hasn't been done on wording. Legal experts, the Coalition Home for Good, have done substantial work on this, and we're seeing a very slow response from the government on this. I asked the Taoiseach last year in the Dáil about the referendum on housing, and he confirmed at that point there would be a referendum on the right to housing. And now we have the government tonight saying, well, maybe it won't be a referendum on the right to housing, it might be something else on housing. Now, what is it going to be on housing that you're going to put in the Constitution if it's not going to be a right to housing? How could you possibly think, with the situation that we're in, that you're going to fall short of a right to housing? What does that say to all the people living in emergency accommodation? What does that say to the more than 2,000 children living in emergency accommodation now? You're not sure whether they should have a right to housing? Is that the government position? What's it say to the people who are living homeless now? Last year there was an 80% increase in individuals who are homeless who died either in emergency accommodation or on our streets. Huge increase. But the government don't think they're going to act
fast on this. Now, I also want to say I think the government have got to get their story straight when it comes to housing and stop contradicting themselves. Minister for Housing at the last election told us during the election campaign that he was going to deliver 10,000 social homes a year and 10,000 affordable, direct build affordable homes each year. He's then spent most of the time since the election telling us that that's a load of rubbish and it can't be done and it's pie in the sky. And now we have today a report from the ESRI not only saying can it be done, and not only saying that it's fiscally possible to do this, the ESRI are actually saying the fiscally prudent thing to do would be to do this. And in fact, if we don't do this, we're going to continue to pump more and more money into current spending and into housing supports at very expensive rates if we don't put in that capital investment. And they're actually correctly arguing and making the case that the fiscally responsible thing for the government to do would be to build about 18,000 social and affordable homes each year. And that's coming from the ESRI, who are not left-wing radicals, and yet, you know, they're mainstream think tank and mainstream commentators, and the government usually is very happy to accept their research and their recommendations, but it does seem on this occasion that the government is left scrambling in how to respond on that. We've had and we're going through a discussion at committee stage on the Housing Committee at the moment about the Land Development Agency. The government can't get their story straight on that. We've been told intermittently that in Dublin City that the government will provide 100% affordable and social homes on public lands. At other times we're told that this will happen in all of Dublin. At other times we're told it's going to happen in all cities around Ireland. And at other times we're told it will happen in all urban areas on public lands. The government can't even decide when they're giving these sorts of commitments what areas do they apply to. And at the same time, the government is putting forward a bill that will only allow as a baseline 50% of homes on public lands to be affordable. So we need urgency on this. We need the government to get their story straight on housing and act on it, and we need the government to accept mainstream advice like from the ESRI. Gurv Margaret.
Deputy Duncan Smith.
Gurv Margaret. Deputy O'Callaghan gave a fantastic speech just now, within 5 minutes, on exactly what's wrong with the government approach at the moment. It is mixed up, it's contradicting itself, it makes no sense, it's absolutely all over the place. This, and I commend the bill from the proposers, and we will support it. Something Deputy O'Callaghan said as well was that this is now mainstream thought, that this is not fringe or radical thought, that this has now reached the political and economic mainstream. So as usual, the last to get on board with any kind of progressive move across any issue, be it social policy or economic policy, or in this case, housing policy, is the two predominant government parties. There's an opportunity here with a referendum on the right to housing and to enshrine it in the Constitution for actually quite a unified, positive cross-party approach. If it's just looked at by a different perspective from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. It's what the people want. We had statements today in the Dáil. We were here a couple of hours ago with statements on traveller accommodation. A debate that was motivated into the schedule this week by recent reports about the destitution and squalor, absolute squalor that people are living in, that families are living in, that children, citizens of this state are living in, that have been denied any kind of rights, basic human rights, basic human dignity, and basic rights to housing. The Constitution has for too long been used as an artificial barrier for people to access these basic rights. It has allowed the interests of the right and private interests to leverage the Constitution in their favour. And where are we? We're in this housing crisis, which is now over a decade long. And according to the ESRI, unless the investment is made, unless the investment is made now will last another decade. We're losing generations, not just one generation. It's 2 at the moment. There'll be 2 more unless something is done. And when we peel back everything, when we peel back it all, we peel back all the reasons, all the complex reasons, it comes down to some very simple things. It comes down, in many ways, to the price of land as one thing. If we look at the Kenny report, which has been gathering dust now for 50 years, and what has stopped that from being brought forward, it is the threat that it would be shot down in the courts, that it's unconstitutional. Well, let's tackle that. This is how we tackle it. We can challenge it in the court, test it in the courts, or we can amend our constitution, or we can do both. We have to do something, and we have to do it quickly. It's far too slow, and hopefully we will get to a stage where we can look back from a position that the housing crisis has been resolved somewhat. That seems so far away that people can't even imagine it at this time. But hopefully we do look back. And people will wonder and scratch their head in incredulity as for how long did this country and politicians and governments not do the right thing. Leading into the last election, which may seem a long time ago, it wasn't that long ago. It was just over a year ago. Many parties, including my own, including the proposers of this motion, including the parties of the previous 2 speakers, had this in their manifesto and in their campaigns. This is mainstream now. This has broad public support. And even even if we're to give campaign advice for the government parties going into the next election, which we don't want to do, if you brought this in, you would benefit electorally from it, because it's the right thing to do. It's economically the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do from an ethical point of view. It is the right thing to do to solve this housing crisis, and it has to be done. And we'd ask that you totally reorientate your thought and your position towards this issue in terms of the right to housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. Now, Deputy McBarry, please.
Saturday before last, I took a walk around Granabraher, took the opportunity to give out a few leaflets. I was walking down the road, 3 young fellas standing around a car. One of them says to me, "Good morning, Deputy." So I kind of kicked myself for not having given him a leaflet. Of course, I should have given him a leaflet, and I did it then, and to his friends as well. And one of them said to me, "Well, you picked the right issue anyway, housing." I said, "Are you affected yourselves?" They laughed. "All living at home. How old are you, lads? 30 years of age, 28 years of age, 28 years of age." But the third fella said, "But I have a plan. I'm going to get me a house." I said, "How are you going to manage that?" He said, "Well, it's taken a few weeks to put it together. It's very detailed at this stage, but I'm going to murder my parents." And the friends laughed. And he said to me, "Mick, with this bloody government, that's the only way that I'm going to get a house." And I think a big question for Irish society and a big question for this government is, are those young people going to go out on the streets? Are their generation going to go out on the streets on the housing issue? Christmas 2016, we saw the massive public support for the Apollo House occupation. September 2018, we saw the Take Back the City occupations. Spring of 2019, we saw sizable Raise the Roof demonstrations. And in February 2020, we saw this issue hit like a thunderbolt in the general election as young voters flocked to the polls, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were hit hard, recording a historic low vote. That's been cut across by the pandemic, which has dominated for more than a year now. We're not out of the woods on the pandemic yet, but hopefully it is now beginning to recede. And we're seeing the beginnings of the re-emergence of the housing issue. It's dominated leaders' questions in the Dáil here for the last few weeks. I think it's only a matter of time before it returns to the streets. I'm not the only person who thinks that. Columnist in the Irish Times, Una Mullally, said recently, "When people can gather safely, a movement akin to the anti-water charges protests will begin. A new housing movement will be the dominant force in Irish politics and culture. It will define the next steps of Ireland's social revolution, which is ongoing, and rooted in the demands and standards of a population miles ahead of a panicking, inept coalition and regressive mentalities of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, which created both the property crash and the contemporary housing crisis. I think the housing issue will re-emerge onto the streets. I think the only question is, to what degree will that be the case? And the government do not have 4 years. This is not going to wait till the next general election. This is something that is very much in the pipeline now. Now, what ideas can such a movement be built around? The ESRI said this morning that the state needs to double investment to tackle the housing crisis. That's at a very, very minimum. I think it's a real sign of the scale of the crisis that an establishment organ like the ESRI are now agreeing with the views that have been put forward by the socialist left in recent years. Of course, it's important where increased expenditure should go. It should not go into the pockets of the landlords, like the $1 billion that this government gives to the landlords every year now in HAP and other supports of that kind. It should not go towards the privatisation of housing. The Land Development Agency is the biggest privatisation operation in the history of this state, a giveaway of public land to the private developers. Governments say it's necessary to create housing. But what kind of housing? They say 450,000 is affordable for Dublin, 400,000 is affordable for Cork. That's a joke. That's housing for profit, not housing for people. We need the exact opposite. But in order to have the exact opposite, what you need to do is you need to break with the capitalist market. That is the key to it. Public housing on public land. Massive building of social housing, of council housing. And council housing for all ordinary people, like in European countries where workers on average incomes can avail of council housing. And genuinely affordable housing. Not the market price minus 50,000, 400 to 450,000, but you have affordable housing, cost price. You can build a house in this country for €200,000 there or thereabouts. That's the kind of social, that's the kind of affordable housing we need in this country. And if the government don't deliver, and I have no faith in them to deliver, we need to have a mass movement to force change like we did on the water charge.
Thank you very much, Deputy Barry. Minister?
Thank you very much, Count Corla, and I thank all the speakers for their contributions in the debate, which I have listened to. And obviously in my open remarks, I did set out clearly the direction of travel that this was going to take, and I also set out clearly how urgently that we are taking it and that the interim chair had been appointed. So I think it is very clear in terms of what we are doing. The Constitution obviously affects us all, and we must balance, as I said previously, any proposal with other rights in our Constitution. We must protect against any unintended consequences and mindful of the interdependencies between the different rights. And obviously that's why we have our commission set up to tease out these issues, and we have our interim chair, which has been appointed, as I also referenced. Of course, we have to be very mindful in terms of what homes we deliver on the ground, and as Deputy Canny, I think, referenced that, in effect, the change in the Constitution does not actually deliver homes on the ground. That's why the government will continue to advance a range of commitments that we have set out for in the programme for a partnership government to deliver more homes and prevent homelessness, supported by unprecedented levels of funding in our state. We'll also deliver affordable, quality housing solutions that are available to everyone in society. The review of the National Development Plan and the upcoming Housing for All plan, which will be published this summer, will set out an ambitious range of affordable housing targets across the country over the coming years. Our housing plan, Housing for All, will also set out the roadmap for how and when these targets will be met. And as I have outlined earlier, the establishment of the Housing Commission will be a key part in delivering a commitment to hold the referendum on housing, which will be thought out through it. The terms of reference of the Commission should be finalised this September, and now as we have appointed our chair-designate, as I referenced, this will also be set a clear timeline for the Commission to go about and do its work. Debates such as these have a crucial role to play in identifying the range of issues needed to be considered by the Commission and in highlighting the views of all parties. And we're glad to participate and support this debate and to thank deputies for raising the key issues which they have. And it's also important that we allow the Commission then to do its work. As I said, Minister O'Brien has met with a number of stakeholders already, and it's very important to get a clear direction forward. I think a number of people have raised very valid points in terms of housing and how to deliver housing on the ground. I think Deputy Canny raised a key point that we're trying to deliver through our Town's First programme and delivering on units that are vacant and derelict, which I think is going to be very important for our towns and villages right across the country, and as well as the review of the National Development Plan in terms of Irish water, because a lot of development is blocked because the key infrastructure unfortunately isn't there. So a lot of work will be done on that. And just to reference what was said in relation to the Land Development Agency, that it was a cap in terms of the 50% affordable. That's absolutely incorrect. The 50% is a minimum affordable, and when one considers that's coupled with our new Part 5, which will be 20%, that will bring it up to a minimum of 70%. And obviously the Minister has said in Dublin he would aim for it to be 100% and in other cities around the country. So we have, a minimum of 70% that's going to be set out in legislation, and that's going to be a key delivery mechanism for the state. And obviously we'll be able to deliver housing in a counter-cyclical manner when our economy is under stress, with all the draws that are directly related on it. So many of the points that are raised I bring back to Minister O'Brien. But I just want to say in terms of finally that, class and everything is referenced so much in this debate. I myself am not a landlord. I'm from a very modest background, live in a 3-bed semi. My counterparts and myself have went through that pressure of trying to get our first home. So I think sometimes when you hear, some of the contributions using very colourful language, we have to be realistic here. We're all trying to do our best, and we all try and support a government, of which I do, to try and deliver for our citizens and do our very best to do that. And there's a huge will, I think, in this government to do that, and the Taoiseach has been very clear that it's priority number one. And you can come in and use comments like politically fried and all those colourful language. That won't deliver houses. We're in the business of trying to deliver houses and trying to do that as quickly as possible. And as I said myself, I come from a modest background that have learned to work, took out an apprenticeship or got an apprenticeship, which I was lucky to get when I left college, and went through and served my time and tried to do my best and got opportunities in society too from a working class background. And that is exactly what I want to ensure others have that opportunity, and to realise that everyone has an opportunity to get a set of keys for that all-important home that they're able to grow with their family. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Burke. Now, Deputy Boyd Barrett, will you conclude this important debate for us, please?
I will. Look, Minister, it's not like we want to personalise things in any way or comment on your particular background or anybody else's. But there is absolutely no doubt that the policies that have been pursued. I first entered the Dáil in 2011. Same year Fine Gael and Labour came into government, and I'm in it 10 years now. And that government, by the way, Enda Kenny, in its programme for government, promised to end homelessness within the period of the term of that government. And what followed was not the ending of homelessness, but the spiralling of homelessness and the housing crisis out of all control. And 10 years on, the situation is as bad or worse than ever. In fact, it's worse, very considerably worse. And right from the beginning, and this is the frustration I have to say I feel on a personal level, from day one when I came into Dáil Éireann, I could see the writing on the wall for the housing crisis that was going to come because of policy decisions that were made in those first couple of years. Policy number one was the decision in June 11, and I remember the circular so well, and I highlighted it in the Dáil, and nobody took a blind bit of notice at the time. And I pointed out most of the journalists didn't even know what a RAS scheme was. They hadn't come up with the term HAP. But essentially, there was a document that said, we're not going to build council houses anymore, we're going to do these RAS schemes. And I tried to point out to the journalists who at that point didn't even know what a RAS scheme was, this was going to be a disaster. And it was a conscious policy because it was linked to the Michael Noonan policy of inviting in the vulture funds to refloat the property market, and the deal with them, undoubtedly, was now you will be getting the RAS money, and then later it became HAP, from the local authorities because we're not going to be building the council houses anymore. Okay? It was a plan. Now, in whose interest did that plan operate? Well, it self-evidently didn't operate in the interest of the 100,000 families who were still on the housing list, or on HAP tenancies where they're completely insecure. It didn't operate in the interest of the working people out there trying to buy an affordable home, or the renters who are now paying €2,000 a month or €2,500 a month. Whose interest did it operate in? Who benefited? You know, it's a famous adage, isn't it? Who benefits? Well, it's obvious. The people who own property benefited. The developers, the vulture funds, the cuckoos benefited enormously. And it was all set up for them. So what was driving them? Was it ideology, belief in the market, or was it the fact that there's a disproportionate number of landlords in the Dáil? A combination of all of these things. But I can tell you it was a disaster. An absolute disaster. And I heard you use the term, what was it, fantasy economics earlier on? When we said at that time, and it was in every budget document we produced back there from about 2012, we needed to build about 20,000 public and affordable homes. Fantasy economics we were accused in, year out. What a load of nonsense. I remember I got up at one of the first leaders' questions I ever did in 2012, and I warned that we were heading back towards the tenement conditions that Sean O'Casey described in his plays at the turn of the century. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil were rolling in the aisles with laughter. Hoots of derision for even suggesting such a thing. Absolute contempt. But what was driving me was the housing misery of the people who were coming into my office. That's what was driving me, and it's still driving. And they were out there with me today. The tenants of St. Helens Court, 4 years on, 2 vulture funds on, and decent working people are being told by the council, we have nothing for you, you're going into a homeless hostel. Right? And I've been citing this example for 4 years. In an apartment complex where there are now 13 empty apartments, perfectly refurbished, sitting empty, and where the representative of that vulture fund went into the PRTB to secure the eviction, and the barrister representing them said, this is not very pleasant, but our client has to maximise the value of the property. And yous allow that. And that is the point of this bill. To say, sorry, that ruthless greed for profit is not more important than the right of those people not to be put out on the street next week. Okay, now this bill won't sort it all out, but it will dramatically shift the legal balance in favour of the right to secure and affordable housing, and it will clear away the excuses you have used consistently to say, we can't have rent controls, we can't stop those unjust evictions, we can't take action against all the empty property that's been sat on, that Deputy, sorry, I've forgotten his name again, anyway, one of the other deputies spoke about all the empty property that's been sat on by these property owners when it could be used to house people. We could take aggressive action. Every time we say, I'll just finish on this, Count Corley, every time we say we need rent controls, we need to stop unfair evictions, we need to take action against the speculators, we're told the Constitution is a blockage. So we're proposing to remove that blockage, but in addition, you need to accept that the policy approach you've taken has been a disaster, and that maybe the left were right, okay? And that maybe we need to start to invest in public and affordable housing on our own land and push the vultures, the cuckoos, and the people who see housing as an opportunity to make profit out of the picture.
Thank you very much, Deputy Boyd Barrett. The motion now is that the bill be read a second time. Is that agreed? Agreed. It's agreed, and therefore the question is carried, and the bill is accordingly read a second time. The Dáil stands adjourned now until 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the 15th of June, here at the National Convention Centre. Go to Mahakif.